This episode of the House of Mystery is brought to you by Legacy Food Storage. The best way to protect your family is by being prepared. LegacyFoodStorage.com.
New U.S. sanctions on Iran took effect today, 6 months after President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the international nuclear deal.
The sanctions target Iran's shipping, financial, and energy sectors, all key to the country's already struggling economy.
Bombs, which the FBI referred to as improvised explosive devices, were sent to the FBI's bomb laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
We're in Mexico again tonight as thousands of migrants try to find a faster way to the U.S. border. The White House says it's now getting help from the Mexican government.
Breaking news out of Pittsburgh. The man accused in the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh is pleading not guilty, and he also wants a jury trial. You can see he's facing a 44 counts.
In the final seconds before the Boeing 737 MAX crashed into the water, it was traveling at more than 500 kilometers an hour. All 189 people on board were killed.
You've now entered the House of Mystery.
Crime, conspiracy, history, and science.
With your hosts, Al Warren, Mike Brown,
Julie Sav, Michael Butterfield,
Dr. Joseph Usinski, and Michael Hawley.
Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Time again, whatever time that is. It must be House of Mystery time.
It is. It's a mysterious house.
Yeah, it certainly is. Wow. So we have a good show coming up today. We're going to be talking about false confessions, and of course we have Laura Nirider from the Brendan Dassey Making a Murderer case. And she does a podcast about false confessions, so we're going to talk about her experience with that and working with these cases. Did you fall asleep?
Yeah. No. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk to her because I followed that, like everybody else who is into true crime, followed that on Netflix pretty closely. And the fact that she is Brendan Dassey's lawyer is really cool. That poor guy needs great representation, and I think she is just the person to nail that.
Yeah, and she did some of the West Memphis 3, which I'm surprised. Just think, those people are so vicious. Not the 3, but the people that think they're guilty. Wow, I could not believe they're really into all that Satan stuff, and it's just crazy. I just shake my head.
Yeah, my head is shaking too. I mean, I've got one of Damien Eccles' books called High Magic, and it just essentially talks about his spiritual practice and how he got through being in prison. And I can tell you that guy is no evil Satanist. He's just not.
Yeah, well, most of the stuff they said, or they claim, even people that have written books, and I've seen what they claim, and most of it's just, made up in the mind, weird stuff. I just can't believe it. But those people sometimes are unstable. I didn't even want to jump into it after all the beginnings. That was just crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway. Hey, so Van Halen died.
Yeah, Eddie Van Halen. That was very sad. I was a big fan of Van Halen. I mean, that's my era, right? So.
Yeah, you're old.
Well, not that old. Not as old as you.
No, I know. Mine was Bing Crosby, so I
Oh, no. You're not that old.
Yeah, I'm Bing Crosby. Yeah, it's really too bad. I was surprised because I didn't realize he was still having issues with it, but I don't follow the gossip, I guess, enough. Like, I'm not watching enough of those shows, so I didn't know. So I'm kind of shocked. He was only 65.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah. So, they just, I tell you, it goes fast. Oh, wow. This is interesting. Now, Doc, you're going to think I'm making this up.
Okay.
A chiropractor.
That's all you had to say was a chiropractor.
His name is Dr. Finger. Okay.
You aren't making that up.
No, I'm not. Dr. Finger actually got caught fingering a patient, and performing oral sex on her for almost a minute, and
but I could see like a dentist who knocks people out, but chiropractors don't have to make people unconscious, do they?
No, but this guy did this to her.
How?
I don't know. I wasn't there. But she complained, and now the chiropractic board has decided not to take away his license.
What?
Yeah, and in fact, in their decision, what they decided was there would always have to be another person, an adult person, in the room with him when he practices his chiropractic, or whatever you call that. Whenever he's doing something on a female patient, he has to have someone else in the room.
What?
Who's on this board? And
yeah, right.
And how do you get a job as a chiropractor then?
And I'm not doubting the victim by saying questioning how the heck he did that, but I'm just whoa. So he had to force himself upon her, I guess.
Well, I would think, and you don't
need to be naked to have chiropractic treatment, as far as I'm aware.
Well, I always get naked with my chiropractor.
Well, that's because you like him.
Yeah. But, the thing is, I don't think, you don't have to be, but maybe if you were in some sort of lower back or upper leg, if you were in an accident or you had some sort of issue there, maybe you're wearing your underwear. I'm not sure. I always get work on my back if I go to a chiropractor, or my neck. I've never had it. Anything
that puts you alone with somebody, you should be cautious, I guess.
Well, I mean, I'm not that cautious about it, but
it's crazy that these predators can find the right, venue for themselves to be alone with their victims. It's bizarre. Like the old adage about the priests and the Boy Scout leaders and all that kind of stuff being pedophiles. I mean, it's why I didn't get into becoming a Boy Scout leader, because I was afraid of being branded that. Because, I don't have kids. And who's the creepy guy who wants to be a Scout leader? Scouts taught me a lot of stuff about life when I was a kid, and learned a lot of things about survival in the wilderness, all that kind of stuff. I want to be able to pass that on. but I don't want the focus that comes with being a married guy with no kids who's working with other kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it was September 8th. So Dr. Kenneth Zane Finger. Of course, it's in yeah, I know it's in Jacksonville, Florida. So there you go.
I have a weirder doctor name for you. So my cat got really sick, and we had to take him to the doctors, and we wanted a new veterinarian, so we tried another vet locally, and went in. The veterinary practice's name is very normal, but the veterinarian who took care of our little kitty was named Geronimo Piano. Dr. Geronimo Piano.
Oh, there you go.
But Dr. Piano and Dr. Finger should get together. They would make beautiful music together.
Well, yeah. Well, at least they punished him. Dr. Finger also got a reprimand of a $7,500 fine.
Oh, no. Well, there you go. That's all. That $7,500 fine, and you got to have somebody else hanging out with you when you do your work.
I just can't believe that they would allow him to practice. They're allowing him to continue to practice, although mandated. He has to log all female patient visits and have a chaperone at each.
Yeah.
The latest occurred on a 20-year-old woman, and she came in for acupuncture on her back.
So he's done it more than once?
Yeah, I guess so.
What?
Yeah, I don't get this. The woman said she felt violated and embarrassed. This is crazy that they don't just take away his license. Anyway,
it is.
Just, weird stuff going on in this place. Oh, and what's this? Kimberly Guilfoyle. You know her, eh?
No.
She's the she was on Fox News, and then she left, and now she's the girlfriend of Trump Jr.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And anyway, so now stories are coming out about her time on Fox being a broadcaster. They had to pay $4 million in sexual assault, hush money, basically.
To her?
No, to some girls that she was assaulting.
She was oh, okay, wow.
She would make them come, so she'd go on trips for work, of course, going around, and she would make them stay in her hotel room. She would be naked all the time. She would ask them to rub her thighs. And apparently, she was, I don't know, apparently she was being very sexual with these girls.
Well, she doesn't look like Harvey Weinstein, but she sure sounds like him. That's definitely all Harvey Weinstein kind of stuff.
Yeah, and to other women. Meanwhile, she's Don Trump Jr.'s girlfriend. $4 million paid out. Something in the water in Fox, man. It seems like all those people that work there are doing something.
Yeah.
Oof. Isn't that crazy? Wow. I'm going to start doing that.
What are you going to start doing?
Well, start making people stay in the same hotel and wear no clothes and have them rub my thighs. Yeah, jeez.
Oh, dear. I'm not rubbing your thighs, Alan.
Oh, come on.
Oh, it's not my bag.
Yeah, I know. Hey, Dolly Parton is going to pose for Playboy.
Oh, 30 years ago?
No, now. At 74 years old, she's going to pose.
Wow. Well, good for her. You know what? Good for her.
And she said it's going to be tasteful. So there you go. Dolly Parton, tasteful in Playboy. I was thinking more about this, of course. Me with my...
Yeah.
And
you're a Parton fan.
Yeah, well, Dolly, I'm just thinking that Playboy must have a real difficult time surviving these days.
Why do you say?
Well, because there's so much porn online that you can get. Like, the old days, Playboy and Playgirl, I guess, were the source of getting nude pictures was through them, in the 60s, 70s, 80s even, right?
Well, there were others, but they were a little more lowbrow.
Yeah, there's others, Penthouse and all that, but that was kind of the primary way. But now with all of the stuff online, why would you need to get a magazine like that?
I don't think you would. I think some people do still pay for it for the articles.
I like the art. I like the reading. But I'm thinking, so, this could be a new angle for them.
Maybe.
Get Dr. Ruth.
Dr. Ruth Westheimer?
Yeah, get her to pose. No, but if you have all these things that you can't get online, that would draw people to your business.
True, but at the same time, isn't Playboy available digitally as well?
It probably is, but I'm just thinking that might really increase people buying or getting subscription to it.
Maybe,
because you're going to get this. Here's Dolly Parton, and you're going to get, you can have Dr. Ruth, you can have all these old ladies that have never posed nude before, and then you'll have to get their magazine or go to their digital copy in order to see it.
There are a couple of parts of Dolly Parton that people want to see, so...
Two.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know. I'm not really into seeing a naked woman as it is, never mind a 74-year-old.
Well, I mean, I think it's a brave thing to do, and it's going to break some of the norms, like people don't expect to see a 74-year-old woman posing in Playboy, but maybe it's time somebody did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind seeing an older guy.
Right.
So maybe there's a desire for that.
There must be. They wouldn't be doing it otherwise.
I wouldn't think so, but you just never know. So anyway, so I thought that was really interesting. There's all sorts of good stuff going on, and of course in the U.S. they're getting in a new judge, or they're trying.
Yeah.
It's not looking good down there, and I don't know where it's going to go, but Hey, and Scotland's closing down, because of the coronavirus again.
Yeah, we're watching kind of the same thing play out that played out in the spring, aren't we? Europe starts to close down first, and then it'll be us afterward.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we deal with it better than... Well, we didn't do too bad in the spring compared to a lot of other places, but I see a lot more. I see a lot of protests going on about masks and stuff still, and I don't quite understand that.
Well, there were a lot fewer masks I saw at the grocery store the other day. I went out for groceries and just sort of take notice of those things now when you're out and about, and I saw a lot fewer people wearing masks than I have, so people think it's over and it's just beginning again. So
yeah, people have got to stay on it, because I don't know what the big deal is. I mean, it's contagious, just like a flu or a cold. Why wouldn't you just put a mask on, right?
Yeah.
It's become so political because of the U.S., that people kind of are jumping on that, so it's too bad.
Sad that it's become political, because I wear a mask because maybe I do have it, but I would rather not pass it on to somebody else. And I just feel like it's a civic duty to wear a mask, just for courtesy, even.
Well, yeah, of course. And, of course, I had the test there last week.
And you tested negative?
Yeah. But, I will say it was quite it's not as bad as people say.
Okay.
When you lay back and they stick it up your nose, right? Actually, it's not painful at all.
Maybe it depends on who's doing it,
I guess, but what it is when they go in and they push up against, I guess, something on your sinus. Actually, all it does is it kind of tingles, It's kind of like, you know, that tingling that you're just about to sneeze?
Yeah.
That's how it feels. It feels just like that. So they have to keep it there for, I think it's 10 seconds. They count 10 seconds. But that whole time you feel like you're going to sneeze. It feels tingly like you're going to sneeze. And then they pull it out. And it's kind of, so it's not painful. It feels like that. It feels like you want to sneeze. That's the best way I could describe it. It wasn't anything bad. You know, I would have no problem doing it again. So there you go.
Yeah, I haven't had cause to. I haven't been sick. I've been actually healthier this year than any other year. I can remember I haven't gotten a cold or flu or anything like that because I've been more cognizant of washing hands and being around people who may or may not be sick. It's been a healthier year for me.
Well, that's a good thing. Maybe we'll have better flu season too because of it. You know.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Anyway. Well, it's that magic time again. We'll go for a break, and when we come back, we'll have Laura Nirider with us.
Looking forward to it.
We interrupt our programming. This is a national emergency. Important details will follow.
Are you prepared? Legacy Food Storage. The best way to protect your family is by being prepared. Go now to legacyfoodstorage.com. Use coupon code HOM15 now for 15% off. Quick, go!
Welcome back in, and we are at the interview part of the show. Joining us, a special guest, we've got Laura Nirider. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Laura, first of all, before we get into some of this good stuff that you've been doing, let's talk about you. Now, how did you get involved in being in the Innocence sort of project and helping Wrongful Convictions? Where did that come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a question that actually has everything to do with my representation of Brendan Dassey, whose story was told in the Netflix series Making a Murderer. For me, it goes back 13 years when I was a law student here at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I was getting near the end of law school, and I thought I had my whole life figured out, right? I was going to be a business lawyer. That was my plan. I had a job lined up after graduation and everything. And my last year of law school, on a whim, I decided to sign up for a class on wrongful convictions taught by Steve Drizin. Now, I knew nothing about, criminal law. I knew nothing about the justice system. I certainly knew nothing about wrongful convictions. But this just so happened to be about 4 months after Brendan Dassey had been convicted in Wisconsin at trial of raping and murdering Teresa Halbach. And my professor, Steve, had just agreed to handle Brendan Dassey's appeal because he's an expert on false confessions. And so I remember it pretty well. A couple weeks into fall semester, Steve called me into his office, and he said, I've just gotten involved in the case of a young man from Wisconsin, 16 years old, intellectually disabled, who confessed to a murder that I don't think he committed. And he handed me the interrogation videos of Brendan Dassey, the same videos that, years later, would end up in Making a Murderer. and he told me to go home and watch them. So I go home, I sit down on my couch, I take out my laptop, I put in these DVDs, and I watch them all from start to finish. And my heart broke because I saw two adult police officers manipulating a 16-year-old special education student into confessing to a murder that he couldn't even describe. And I knew I couldn't walk away. So that did it for me. I did graduate, thank goodness. And I came back to Northwestern within a few months to start building alongside Steve the Center on Wrongful Convictions, where we've been representing Brendan and a lot of other people just like him ever since.
That's pretty impressive. Now, the confession itself, now there is a lot of false confessions that happen, and for different reasons. Sometimes it's the interrogator, sometimes it's just the person giving the confession. I find that one of the biggest things when we do shows covering that subject, that people actually disagree with at times. So how do you explain it to people that say, I would never confess to something to killing these two people, and they kind of give you that attitude. How do you answer that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's exactly the right question to ask. Why would anyone confess to a crime they didn't commit, especially, of course, something as brutal as rape or murder? And, of course, all of us think that I wouldn't do that. What's the matter with this person who did, right?
Yeah.
So this is part of what fascinated me as I started learning about false confessions and police interrogations. It turns out that the answer to this question, why would anyone falsely confess, has a lot to do with the psychology of the interrogation room. It has a lot to do with the psychological tactics that police officers are trained to use inside the interrogation room, right? Basically speaking, interrogation has two phases, right? The first phase is about reducing a suspect down to hopelessness. You're caught. You're trapped. You're cornered. You have no way out. Your life is over. You're going down for this. And then the second half is about offering confession as a life raft, right? You're caught, but if you confess, people will understand that you're a good person, that you have remorse. They'll want to help you. They'll see that you're cooperating, and so on. But what you see in a lot of these interrogations that result in false confessions, and I have watched hundreds of these videos and represented dozens of these people, is you see this basic structure of interrogation get cranked up, get sort of amped up in ways that would affect any of us. So you'll see, for example, police officers lying about the evidence against a suspect, which most people don't know is perfectly legal in the United States, not many other countries, but it's totally legal here. So you'll see officers saying, you're trying to tell us you're innocent. We found your DNA at the scene. We found your fingerprints on the gun. And you can see the suspect start to think to themselves, my God, how is this possible? I've never been at this crime scene, but this cop says he's got my DNA. He really thinks I did this, right? What am I going to do? So you see those sort of lies in the interrogation room, and then once the suspect feels cornered, trapped, hopeless, you see officers say things like, look, if you don't confess, you'll get the death penalty, or you'll get life in prison. But if you do confess, we'll be able to help you, and so on. And you can see how these tactics combine over the course of many hours, sometimes overnight, to make a suspect think they've got no way out of this horrific situation but to confess. These are really powerful tactics. They are very good at getting true confessions from guilty people, but they're so powerful that they can also get false confessions.
So what's the answer to that? Like, how can we, because I don't want to attack on the police, but there's always, there's a lot of that going on, but how is it that they can make that work better? Like, how can we actually get interrogation to happen, but without the lying and without that stuff? Like, what? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but how can we fix this?
Yeah, how can we fix this? How can we do better? And that's exactly the right question to ask. One of the things that I do that I'm proudest of is I work really closely with police and prosecutors. I'm not about about attacking or, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. What I'm about is learning from these cases, because at the end of the day, nobody wants an innocent person behind bars while the guilty person is out on the street. Nobody wants that. So that's a big part of what I do is I gather these interrogation videos, I study these cases, and I work really closely with law enforcement to figure out better ways of doing things, right? And it turns out that when you look at these cases, you study them, you don't need to lie about evidence in the interrogation room to get a confession, right? You don't need to use death threats. There are way better techniques that are out there that are more based on rapport building, that are more based on conversational techniques that are very good at solving crimes that are being used in other countries all the time. One of the fascinating things about the techniques that I described, the way interrogation works right now, like in all 50 states, these are really commonly used interrogation techniques. One of the fascinating things is that these techniques were developed like 70 years ago, in the 40s and the 50s. And at the time, they were thought of as revolutionary because they replaced physical abuse in the interrogation room, right? It was like the kinder, gentler way of getting at the truth. But what's interesting is now we've had another sort of leap in our thinking now that DNA has been invented. Turns out we are proving confessions false using DNA at a rate that's much higher than anybody ever thought, and under circumstances that are different than anybody thought before. So it's time for us to learn from what these cases can tell us, from what the DNA revolution can tell us, and it's time to work together to, move this forward.
When you go back to the Brendan Dassey and that case, there's also kind of a cult of personality. Like everyone that was involved in that making a murderer, it really goes by their personality and how they're addressed. And I take that as, you look at Ken Kratz, right? The majority of people that watch the show absolutely hate him. And they say a lot of bad things about him. And, he's been on the show 2 or 3 times. He still swears by Brendan Dassey being involved. So do you think that he really believes that? Or do you think he just can't let go of it? Or because it hurts his own persona? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And, I can't speak to what's in somebody else's head, of course. But what I can say is, when you have worked on as many false confession cases as I have, and that my colleagues and I have, right? And these are cases where confessions have been proven false by DNA, cases where we know they're false. You see exactly the same kinds of things play out in those cases. You see old school law enforcement who may not necessarily mean any harm whatsoever, who may really want to get the real perpetrator, keep them behind bars. Old school law enforcement having a hard time adjusting to this new reality where false confessions really happen. They happen under circumstances that are different than you think. It doesn't take physical abuse, especially for someone like Brendan Dassey. It doesn't take heavy-handed techniques. Brendan was 16 and in special ed. He was in 10th grade. And, one of his special ed accommodations in school, in the classroom, was that he needed an adult to sit with him so that he could understand the words the teachers were saying to him. His disabilities are really verbal. He has a really hard time understanding spoken words. So he needed this adult with him in the classroom to help him, cope with that. And when you put a kid like that inside the interrogation room and you bombard him with 5 to 6 questions per minute for hours and hours and hours with no adult, no lawyer, no parent, no nothing by his side, these are exactly the kind of circumstances that you see in hundreds of cases across the country that can lead to false confessions. And Brendan, and of course that sort of key moment, one of the hardest, but also most important moments that was shown in Making a Murderer from Brendan's interrogation, when he says, when he is trying to guess how Teresa Halbach was killed, and he can't get it right? He guesses all these different ways of killing somebody. The officers keep telling him he's getting it wrong. Finally, Brendan has no idea what to say, and he sort of throws up his hands and says, "We cut off her hair," just totally at sea. And he has to be told by the interrogators that she was shot in the head. That is such a classic sequence. I have seen that dozens of times in dozens of cases where somebody has been sort of made to think it's in their best interest to do what these cops want, trying to give them the story that they want, and just can't come up with it because they weren't there. It's so classic.
I worked with intellectually challenged kids before, so people who were Brendan's age, and I can totally see when watching the quote-unquote confession on Making a Murderer how Brendan was wanting to help those officers come to their conclusion, and that's why he was throwing out those guesses. I like I say, I've worked with those kids, and that's what they want. They want to be able to help. And
they want to please the authority figure, right? Exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's what I always say about this case. You don't have to be a lawyer to kind of get what's going on with Brendan, right? You need to be a parent, right? Maybe a mom or a dad or a teacher or a neighbor or somebody who knows someone like Brendan. Mm-hmm. And, after the series came out, I had the very, very good fortune of being able to travel around the globe to talk to people about Making a Murderer and Wrongful Convictions and Brendan and False Confessions and all of these issues. And wherever I spoke, literally across the globe, people would come up to me afterwards and say, you know what, I know someone like Brendan. I have a Brendan in my life. And my heart broke when I saw him doing just that, just trying to please these older, authority figures. It's Brendan himself who moves people, and people have got it right. He's a great guy.
Why can't the prosecutor or the court or the system put an adult in the room? Why can't they assign someone? Because, I don't want to put down Brendan's mother or any parent figure there, but to leave your child who's got challenges, never mind just being 16 years old, in an interrogation for hours with, these policemen, why doesn't there have to be an adult there to kind of level it out? Because there's nobody on his side then.
I think level it out is exactly the right phrase. It's obviously not a level playing field when you've got any kid, like you say, let alone somebody with disabilities like Brendan. Here's the interesting thing, and this is something that not a lot of people know. Only about 13 or 14 states require police right now to try to contact a parent before questioning a child. So in the vast majority of states, there's no requirement that a parent get notified. That's something we're working on changing very much. I'm a mom. I've got 2 boys, and I would be horrified to find them being questioned, being put in any sort of legal jeopardy without my knowledge. But that happens in a lot of these cases. But you're also right that sometimes a parent's protection isn't enough. Parents are susceptible to these interrogation tactics just like their kids are. Parents can be sort of confused and that sort of a thing. So the reform that we really push for at the Center on Wrongful Convictions is to require a lawyer in the interrogation room for kids. Now, this was the law in 0 states before Making a Murderer, but after the world saw what happened to Brendan, I'm pleased to say that 2 states so far, Illinois and California, have passed the first laws in the country requiring lawyers in the interrogation room for certain kids. It is, those are early steps, those are baby steps, but they are long overdue to protect, all of our kids.
Now you've been doing a podcast now, Wrongful Conviction podcasts. How did that start out? Like, why do a podcast?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, it did have everything to do, again, with Making a Murderer. When those filmmakers showed up in Brendan's case and started filming us in court, we didn't solicit it. We didn't ask for it. We sort of had no idea who they were until they told us they wanted to make a series about it. And when the series was released years and years later, we didn't expect it to light the world on fire the way it did. Suddenly after working on Brendan's case for 9 years, suddenly the world was saying his name. The world was having that same transformative moment that I had when I was a law student, right? They were watching the same videos and sitting up bolt upright on their couches just like I had done and saying, this is not right. This is not okay. What can I do to help to make sure this doesn't happen again? And when I saw firsthand how this Netflix series, transformed the way so many people thought about the criminal justice system and the way that it interacts with, people who maybe aren't rich or powerful or well-connected, I thought to myself, well, geez, if Brendan's story can energize people this much for change, I got a lot more stories like that. Stories that are just as engrossing, just as fascinating, just as disturbing, and just as motivating, right? To get people organized, to get people calling for action, calling for change, getting people aware of the system, aware of what their rights are. And so that's what led Steve Drizin and myself to create our podcast, Wrongful Conviction, False Confessions. You know, we've worked on so many of these false confession cases that have videos from inside the interrogation room that are just like Brendan's, sometimes even worse. And so we use that real interrogation audio to tell 12 different stories of false confessions of people who, you know, were manipulated into falsely confessing inside the interrogation room, who were convicted on the basis of those confessions, and then, you know, sometimes over the course of years, even decades, fought and fought and fought for the truth until they were finally exonerated. They're incredible stories, every single last one of them. Each episode includes an interview with the person whose story we tell, the person who falsely confessed, a little check-in with them. You know, what did your experience mean to you? What are you doing with your free life now? And you wouldn't believe some of the answers we're getting. You know, it's like after spending 30 years in prison, little things like, you know, feeling the sunlight on your face or smelling freshly cut grass. That's what means everything to these folks. It's really, really inspiring.
How do you choose these cases in the sense of there's a lot of people that say they were convicted wrongly or confessed because of whatever reason, intimidation, there's all sorts of reasons. So how is it that you make a decision to follow up on a case as opposed to not? Like what's kind of the line you draw on or criteria you use?
Sure, absolutely. So if I take a step back and answer as a lawyer, you know, at our Center on Wrongful Convictions, we get about 3,500 letters every year from inmates all around the country who say that they were wrongly convicted, who say that they're innocent, and who ask us to look into their cases. There are 5 of us at the center, so we can take very, very, very few cases, right? We are a pro bono organization. We don't charge anyone who we represent. You know, Steve and I have never charged Brendan or his family a single nickel for the work we've done on his behalf, and proud of it, frankly. So we are very careful, anyway, to pick cases not only where we believe in folks' innocence, but where we think we can really help. There's something that we can actually do to make a difference. You wouldn't believe the cases that come across our doorstep, right? It's not a case of just sort of magically being able to discern somebody is innocent when other people haven't been able to. We have cases come to us where people confessed during interrogation, right? People confessed to rape and murder, and then the DNA from the rape victim's body was tested before trial and excluded them definitively, and they were convicted anyway on the basis of their confession. You know, that's usually a pretty good sign that case is worth looking into. We had a case like that a few years ago, the Dixmoor 5. It was a case of 5 teenagers who were interrogated about the rape and murder of their 14-year-old classmate, right? They were all interrogated. 3 of them ended up confessing and implicating the whole group, right? They all go down for this crime, but before any of them went to trial, the DNA from this rape victim is tested, and it's not any of the 5 teenagers. But they still go down based on the confessions, spend close to 20 years in prison before we and a couple of other innocence organizations around the country decided to take their cases. And at that point, we took the DNA sample from the victim and ran it through the national DNA database, which didn't exist 20 years ago, but now it does. So we were able to run it through the database and get an exact match to a single adult, male, repeat sex offender who lived a couple blocks away from the victim and who had a history of raping and attacking other women, including after this 14-year-old girl was attacked. You know, it's signs and signals like that when a case just doesn't make sense, especially where the scientific evidence doesn't make sense. You know, that's what makes you at least take a second look at a case.
And I know one thing that you guys cover a lot or talk about is, what they call junk science. How difficult is that to get reversed when they have, there's different science that comes out, or they call it science, that actually get people convicted. There's things that aren't really that conclusive. How can you get people to think differently about some of these things?
No, it's really interesting when you get into the criminal justice system and start, reading about cases, reading trial transcripts, police reports, the real sort of nuts and bolts of how our system works. There are so many things we think are true about forensic science and, frankly, about the functioning of the criminal justice system. So many things we all think are true that it turns out are sort of based on myths or old information, outdated information. One great example is, we all believe that no one would falsely confess. Well, now we're learning that this happens way more often than we think. And junk science is another really good example. It's another host on the Wrongful Conviction podcast network, Josh Drizin, has a series about junk science that people should check out. It's excellent, where he brings on experts who deconstruct a lot of the scientific evidence that is used all the time in jury trials, stuff like blood spatter evidence or gunshot residue evidence, right? This kind of stuff that we're all used to hearing about on CSI. But it turns out there's more and more reasons to question the accuracy of a lot of this kind of evidence.
Yeah, I saw that with I think it was an episode on false confessions, that something about the teeth marks not being reliable in a case that someone got put away with. So found that
that's another.
Because I always thought it was reliable. I always thought it was.
Of course you did. I did too before I started learning about all this stuff.
Right?
All of us thought that stuff was reliable. I did too before I started learning about this world. So it's an incredible world when you start sort of peeling off the layers of myths and just outdated beliefs, right, that have been at the core of the way our criminal justice system works for so long. That's one reason why being a wrongful conviction lawyer is so exciting, because you can say not only was there a mistake in this one case, but let's figure out what this tells us about the whole system and how we can make it better. And that's really what I'm focused on in my work and in our podcast too.
Yeah. It kind of, if I get into it and watch a series like that or any of them, I start to feel overwhelmed. I start thinking, holy cow, there's so much BS out there. And with that False Confession series, there was a lot of, I have a lot of true crime writers and people that I'm friends with on social media or interact with. There's quite a bit of blowback to that. A lot of people that say that these shows are wrong. They're not doing it right. They're only showing you part of it. How do you answer to something like that?
Yeah, I think that is true of a lot of the true crime shows that are out there, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's a lot you can say about the true crime genre, right? About ways it's interesting and compelling, and maybe some ways in which it can feel sort of cheap and sleazy sometimes too. Yeah. When it comes to our stories, the stories we tell, our false confession stories in our podcast are based on real video of interrogations, so the video shows what it shows, and it's based on DNA evidence. The stories we tell are people who've been proven innocent by DNA, and that DNA very often has identified the real perpetrators. So, we tell stories that are backed up by video evidence and by science, and that, in fact, are some of the most sort of prominent cases of wrongful conviction in the country, because in many ways, when you hear about these false confession cases, when you listen to these interrogation videos, they can be some of the most disturbing cases of wrongful conviction. You're actually seeing an innocent person, have their words used against them. And, it's fascinating and disturbing.
Yeah. So you're in season 12 now. What are some of the cases you're covering for the new season? Yes. So the episode that we just released yesterday is one I'm particularly proud of. Actually, you can check it out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. The episode we dropped yesterday was the story of two intellectually disabled brothers from North Carolina who were interrogated after a little girl from their community was found
horrifically murdered. And these two guys were very disabled. One of them had an IQ about half that of Brendan Dassey, if that kind of helps you figure it out. And they ended up signing confessions written out by the cops that they couldn't even read. And not only were they convicted on the basis of these confessions, but the older of the two brothers, the 19-year-old, was sent to death row in North Carolina. Turns out the prosecutor, the DA who had prosecuted these kids, was written up in the Guinness Book of World Records as the deadliest DA, right? One of the district attorneys in the country who was, I guess, most prolific at seeking the death penalty, right? Exactly.
That's what I want to be.
There you go, exactly. And he sent 47 people to death row. Come to find out years later, more than 10 of those convictions were reversed for prosecutorial misconduct. After his cases started getting reversed, some really great lawyers got a hold of these guys' case, and of course retested the DNA from this little girl's body, and found it hit to a serial rapist who had been preying on other women in that exact area in a manner almost identical to the way this girl was killed. But in the meantime, what happened before they got that DNA hit to the real perpetrator? The Supreme Court was having a debate. Years after these guys were convicted, they were having a debate about whether we should have the death penalty, right? Whether the death penalty should be constitutional. And one of the justices held up these two brothers from North Carolina, who were at that time sitting on death row, and he said, basically these are the poster children for the death penalty, these two brothers, because of the horrificness of this crime. Oof. Turns out then the DNA is tested and they were innocent the whole time. So it's an incredible story. It kind of says a lot about the conversations we're having right now in our society, and what happens when two brothers like these, good men, very good men, run up against some pretty powerful forces in our system.
Did you ever touch off on the West Memphis 3?
Yes, actually, I was part of the legal team that represented the supposed ringleader of the West Memphis 3, Damien Eccles. Damien's still a very good friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had contact with him a couple of times. Man, we were going to do kind of an episode having different people involved in it and people that went on both sides. I cannot believe how aggressive the people are that are against him.
That's the thing, right? What happened in that case, right? This is this 1993 case involving 3 8-year-old boys from West Memphis, Arkansas, who were killed brutally. The crime is bad.
Yeah.
It's about as bad as it gets. I mean, I don't think anyone on the planet would disagree with that. So there is this sort of natural human instinct. We all feel it, right? All of us who are parents. I've got an 8-year-old boy myself right now. All of us who are parents feel that anger and that rage at the crime itself. But what you see in wrongful conviction cases is that anger and the moral certainty that you feel about how wrong this was, that this happened to these little kids, that moral certainty about the wrongness of the crime can turn into moral certainty that someone's got to pay. And that attitude can drive wrongful convictions in some of these really horrific cases. You just want someone to pay. And if the police say, hey, we think it might be this guy, it's all too easy for any of us, right, to focus on, well, if there's some evidence against these guys, we want to string them up. In the West Memphis 3 case, of course, as in many other cases, there's no real evidence linking the 3 teenagers who were convicted, no reliable evidence at all. So I totally understand people's need to hold somebody to justice for what happened, but that emotional feeling can really distort investigations and distort the system search for the truth.
Yeah, I was surprised at how aggressive, people really believe they're into the Satanist world and everything, and they're just, wow. Jeez.
Yeah, no, I'm here to tell you, I know all 3 guys very, very well. They're lovely people. I've spent a lot of time with them. It's a real shame it's a real shame. You know, when I was working on that case, and as well as Brendan's case, which I'm still working on, you know, you do get a lot of blowback, a lot of anger from people who, again, are responding to the horribleness of the crime. And it just bears repeating. When I do these cases, my God, yeah. My heart goes out to the victims' families. You know, everybody's does. But defending someone you believe is innocent is just as important as finding the person who actually did it. That's what. Yeah. That's, you know, what keeps me going.
I just don't know how they can sometimes move on with their lives after being a spectacle for so many years. That must be the most difficult, because if I get that kind of blowback just from people online, what's it like for someone like, let's say, Damien Eccles to get out there and get a job or to work and just be normal when you've got a lot of people that just hate him automatically?
Totally. And, you know, Damien, his case was particularly high profile, so that problem was particularly acute for him. But for anyone who has been wrongly convicted, right? I mean, and a lot of these cases were high profile at the time because the crime was so gruesome, was so awful. For anyone coming out of prison after years of being labeled publicly a killer, right? Coming out from that stigma, coming out from that absolute sort of erasure from the world, it's a lot to deal with. It is a whole lot to deal with. I'm so grateful to the people that we work with who support people who are coming out of prison, right? Psychologists, therapists, everybody, you know, philanthropists who pay for housing and food. You know, there's an incredible organization actually called the Sunny Center, which is run by 2 death row exonerees who, after each of them were exonerated off different death rows in different countries, actually found each other post-exoneration, got married, and started this concept, I guess. It's a place in Ireland, in the hills of Ireland, where recently exonerated people can go stay with them, called the Sunny Center. And they can just stay out in the countryside and, you know, do those things I talked about, feel the sunshine on their face, you know, smell the grass, just get used to the rhythm of life on the outside again. It's a beautiful idea. And it's, you know, it's the kind of support that people need after these experiences.
Wow. Well, quite a subject to cover. Do you have a website, or do you have a place that people can come find you or find your for your podcast?
Absolutely. Our podcast is called Wrongful Conviction, False Confessions. You can find it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. And you can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Laura Nirider.
Fantastic. We're going to have that up on our site as well, so people that are listening can just do one click and find out and listen to your podcast and follow you, hopefully. Hopefully nothing negative there. You know, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and geez, I hope you continue to do well and do such a good job.
Oh, thank you. I wish you all the best, and it's been a real pleasure talking about this with you.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.